Let's start with the obvious today. Patients are constantly warned about unsafe drugs, getting their medication outside traditional branded and pharmacy channels. And yet, here we are today, January 6th of 2026, and we're talking about hair found in branded Wegovy pens. Listen, even if patients in the OTP community miss the hair floating around in their GLP-1 pen, they're never going to miss an opportunity to spot hypocrisy when they see it. And today's episode isn't aimed at being anti-big pharma, but it's also not about being pharma friendly. It's about accountability, because there's several stories that really show that there needs to be some accountability at the big pharma level. We're talking about exaggerated claims and early obesity drug data today. We're talking about a loud and deliberate launch of the first GLP-1 pill for obesity. And we're talking about a manufacturing quality story that cannot be separated from the years of pharma attacks on compounded medications and their safety. So these stories are all connected. You're going to see why. And patients in the OTP community are already starting to see it. We're going to talk about all of that today. Welcome to On the Pen.
Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome back to On the Pen. If you're new here, this is a patient-first show. We slow things down. We read past the headlines that you see everywhere, and we talk about what these stories actually mean for people navigating the world of obesity. And today matters. The conversation today matters. The first conversation on the podcast of 2026, because when science and marketing and access and manufacturing quality all sort of converge at the same time, patients are usually the last ones to get clarity and know how to navigate conversations with their medical providing team. So we're going to start fixing that on today's podcast. And today, the first story that I want to talk to you about is Arrowhead. Now, Arrowhead Pharmaceuticals released a major story today. It's got the headlines going around biotech and even in some of the more mainstream news outlets, claiming that its RNA interference drug, ARO-INHBE. They're not even attempting to name these in a way that is memorable, which is interesting given how they're twisting the data. It nearly, and this is the headline, nearly doubled the weight loss of Zepbound when combined with tirzepatide. That is a huge headline, and it's literally everywhere right now. And this was called out very quickly by one of our more astute listeners. Her name's Jenkin Nush, N-U-S-H. For those of you who listen along, you probably know what that means, nutrient-stimulated hormone. And she's right to call this out from the way that it was framed, because here's what actually happened. Arrowhead reported about 9.4% weight loss at 16 weeks. Okay, that's on par with a lot of the molecules that we see in early development right now, a lot on par with a lot of the early data. Now, this was actually in patients with type 2 diabetes and obesity who received the ARO-INHBE, ARO for Arrowhead, INHBE, plus tirzepatide. Now, they compared that to about 4.8% loss in the group that had tirzepatide only. And that's where the nearly doubled claim comes from. But that comparison is far from clean and a huge disservice to the headlines that you're seeing all over. And listen, we're seeing more and more of this in early clinical data, because it does what? They know that a lot of us in the patient community will get excited. They know particularly that those on Wall Street will get excited by seeing you just like slam down high percentages of weight loss in a short amount of time. Now, these trials, I mean, we saw it in the aloralintide trial too, they're stacked. They're stacked with women of higher BMIs who tend to respond better to these drugs to begin with. So they're not super reflective of the broader population, although you may argue they're pretty reflective of real world use of GLP-1s. I think that I saw a stat recently that nearly 75% of patients on Zepbound are women. That's a tremendous figure to contemplate there, and in that sense tracks with kind of how they build these trials. But let's go back to this Arrowhead molecule and the way that this trial was designed, because I think this is important to touch on. So the tirzepatide doses used in this study were 2.5 and 5 milligrams. Now, for anybody who follows this, even at a cursory level, you know that 2.5 milligrams is not considered even a therapeutic dose in terms of how it was tested in Lilly's SURMOUNT trials. And the 5 milligrams was the first therapeutic dose. Those are the starter doses of Zepbound. They're not the doses that define Zepbound's real world performance in terms of weight loss. So Eli Lilly's own SURMOUNT 2 trial in people with type 2 diabetes used 10 and 15 milligrams and showed roughly 8% loss at 16 weeks. So that obviously gives some context to the data that we're hearing today from Arrowhead. You can't really compare a combination against low dose tirzepatide and imply to patients around the world or investors that you beat Zepbound as patients actually take it in the real world. So Jen's right. If you tested tirzepatide at 5 milligrams, say tirzepatide 5 milligrams. Don't say twice as good as tirzepatide. It's crazy. So this, the timing is also interesting because in this study, tirzepatide dosing didn't begin until 2 weeks into the trial. So when Arrowhead reports 16 weeks outcomes, tirzepatide exposure was closer to 14 weeks, not 16 weeks. And that makes a difference in the numbers. And that should have been clearly disclosed, not sort of like glossed over. And that's where these headlines can get frustrating, especially for patients who are desperate, like myself, as slower responders to the current medications, and a patient living with type 2 diabetes. We're also talking about a very small cohort size. So we're talking about 4 or 5 patients per arm. So we're not talking about a high number of people. One super responder in that group can completely change the narrative on one of these molecules. And so while we get excited about future drugs and future medications and the potential for future treatment, this is important context to have, as especially these early phase 1 data numbers pop up. We got to keep these in context and before we get super excited about them. I mean, somebody was just asking me about bioglutide. Like a year and a half, I was talking about bioglutide. It's a quadruple agonist. But, you know, multiple things have been interesting about the data. First of all, we need more data. We have phase 1 data on bioglutide, but also bioglutide, even in its name, suggests that it's a peptide. Not actually the case. It's a small molecule. And so there's just some interesting shenanigans that are pulled in phase 1 to grab the headlines. And I think we need to get more savvy, myself included, about reading those headlines and understanding the data so that we can report on it accurately. So this is not signal finding from Arrowhead. It's not superiority proving. It's phase 1 data, and it deserves a lot of context. And that's what Jen gave us today. And I love following Jen and appreciate her being in the On the Pen community. What this data from Arrowhead does suggest is that we've got some interesting stuff here. Targeting the INHBE appears to meaningfully reduce visceral fat and liver fat, which is a huge deal. That could matter a lot in type 2 diabetes and MASH. I mean, from a metabolic disease standpoint, that's something to get excited about. So there may be a future here in maintenance strategies or possibly lowering the GLP-1 doses with fewer side effects. Those are all worth looking at. But it does not justify overstating what happens in being, you know, doubling the effectiveness of Zepbound with just one early trial. Want to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Our headline sponsor of the podcast is none other than Shed. Shed has been on board with us for a few months now. If you are looking to get treatment for the disease of obesity and you want some really great, strong wraparound care, try Shed. Shed is a wonderful company. I've been using them for a few months now for a few different things. And I have found both of their platform easy to use, pretty easy to navigate. straightforward pricing, and you get access to a doctor who's going to listen to you. You also get access to coaching. Like, the disease of obesity is pretty complex. A lot of us need that coaching to walk through different issues that we may face when getting on the medications. And the biggest thing is, if you are somebody who needs compound to maintain access to these medications, they partner with one of the most trusted compound pharmacies in the country, and that is Strive Pharmacy out of Arizona. I've met them. I trust them explicitly. So if you want to get started, you can go to trished.com. They've got branded options. They'll have the Wegovy pill later this week, but they've got NovoCare and the cash pay Wegovy. They've also got Zepbound and the cash pay vials, access to that, and then compounds for those who can't afford the branded medication. So they've got a little bit something for everybody there, and they're sponsoring our podcast, and we're so thankful to have Shed on board. Use code OTP25, save yourself 25% on signing up at trished.com. So we're going to talk a little bit about that Wegovy pill launch, because I think this was a massive rollout for Novo Nordisk. And I think what a lot of investors were looking for in terms of just being aggressive and doing things sort of the American way, right? Big, loud. Let's talk about the launch yesterday. So it was a very coordinated launch. It was intentional. They officially launched all of their doses of oral Wegovy, which is the first FDA-approved GLP-1 pill for obesity across multiple national telehealth platforms, including our friends over at Ro, and traditional prescribing channels, where you can actually go get this prescribed from your PCP, and you can get it through NovoCare directly to your front door. You can also get it through the Costco pharmacy if you have a Costco in your area and want to pick it up locally. So there is a whole host of options to get your hands on the first ever GLP-1 for obesity. Now, this is not compounded oral semaglutide like you've seen around, which the efficacy is unproven, right? If you wanted an oral version of a GLP-1 previous to this, you had to be diabetic and it would be Rybelsus, or you had to go with the compounded options. And the compounded options lack any sort of real FDA data to show us that they're effective, because oral peptides are very easily broken down by stomach acid. And we've talked about this many times. Novo Nordisk has invested nearly $2 billion in the technology, SNAC technology, that keeps these pills from being broken down by stomach acid and actually makes them orally bioavailable, but only like 10% bioavailable, because when you look at it, you're taking 25 milligrams a day. That's just over 10 times the amount of actual pharmaceutical ingredient you're taking per week than you would be if you were taking the weekly injection at 2.4 milligrams. And I'm not sure what math I just said. I think maybe I said 10 times per day, I guess, is the amount of API that you're using with the oral tablet instead of the injectable tablet per week. And so it's not very orally bioavailable. They add the snack technology, and then that does make it orally bioavailable enough to where 25 milligrams gets you to about the same efficacy as that 2.4 milligram injection per week. So it's FDA approved, it's branded, it's at scale, and millions of people who have avoided obesity treatment because of injections have a real entry point, and I'd say lower psychological and practical barriers, because many people don't want to say they're on the shot, right? So it's sort of like plausible deniability for those people to be like, I'm on a pill. And the reality is that most people living with obesity aren't camping out on obesity content online and learning like you are listening to this podcast each and every week. And so when they go in the doctor's office, they may know very little about the shots other than the word Ozempic and knowing that it's the skinny shot. But if they go in there and the doctor says, hey, there's a pill that's out there and it delivers 15% body weight and you can get on it for $149 a month, I think there's going to be a massive amount of people that check this out and at least try it. So $149 for the first 2 starter doses, and then $299 for the 2 higher doses. And that's the cash pay price. If you're covered for injectable Wegovy, you're probably going to be covered for the pills too, and probably pay like $25 a month for it at the pharmacy. So the pricing is deliberate. Novo actually placed a branded FDA-approved oral GLP-1 directly into this telehealth space that has historically been dominated by compounded alternatives. And so for this community specifically, this is a huge deal, because oral Wegovy is expected to be available through our partners at Shed by the end of the week. I know that there are multiple telehealth companies that many of you use that have also launched that this week. And so as soon as it goes live over on Shed, we'll let you know. But we ask that you check them out as a partner of the On the Pen podcast. So this is a huge launch for Novo Nordisk. I think it came with all the fanfare and maybe a little bit of the eye rolling too. But I as a advocate for obesity care and just knowing the vast amounts of people who have to be reached by these treatments, and knowing that injectables are not only harder to make, they're harder on the environment. They have to maintain cold storage all the way from manufacturing to the time that you inject it. And then, the fact that these things are highly wasteful. I mean, they just are. I mean, these things, I can't imagine how many of these things are in the landfill. And so the pills obviously bring about a lot of answers that the shots don't answer. Will they be as effective long-term as some of the injectable options? Probably not, but I'm certainly going to try it. I'm going to give it a whirl because I know that these injections tend to wear off very quickly for me, perhaps more than they do for the average person. I don't know. And I like the idea of a steady amount of drug in my system rather than these high, what they call peaks and troughs of concentration of medication in your system. So I'm going to give it a try. I mean, what have I got to lose here? What I've got to lose is about 100 pounds. So we'll see. I'm going to try it, and I'll definitely keep you posted on how it goes at On the Pen on our YouTube channel. So stay tuned to that. So I'll probably be starting it sometime next week. So this is a huge positive, I think, in the access category. Lilly and Novo are really flipping the script here on our whole healthcare system quietly, right? I mean, it's not quiet because everybody seems to know about most favored nations and these cash pay offerings. But at the end of the day, I don't know that people understand like how monumental this time is in medicine, because we are talking about vertically integrated telehealth companies offering direct manufacturer pricing for these blockbuster medications, retail pharmacy partnerships like Costco and Walmart. This is like pharma actually meeting people where they're at and in more of a consumer driven way, rather than using these super broken traditional channels like pharmacy benefit managers and insurance companies. So they're not playing the game anymore. They're going direct to consumer. And this, I believe, was a super aggressive move by Novo Nordisk. I applaud them for going down to 199. I'd love to see them go 199 all doses of this oral tablet, and then eventually get there with the injectable versions too. But I think this was an aggressive move that will spawn more and more moves downward on the price of these medications. All of those are great things. And again, I don't think it can be understated that it's a huge deal that we as patients are getting these drugs while they're peaking in popularity at cheaper prices. That just doesn't happen. In fact, just this past quarter, my wife and I had a little insurance hiccup as I left to do this full time. Her Enbrel was filled. It was an $8,000 tab for 1 month. And there was a day where we were paying $4,000 for this, and it's a 20-year-old medicine. I mean, wrap your head around that. It's a biologic. That's why, not to go down too deep of a rabbit hole, it's important that retatrutide does not get classified as a biologic. But I digress. $8,000 a month for a 20-year-old drug. This just does not happen. And you think about the fact that these medications for many, many people are stopping the progression of obesity in its tracks before people develop high blood pressure, before people develop obstructive sleep apnea, before people develop heart failure or stroke. It's just incredible. Reduced cancers. Are you kidding me? And it's getting cheaper. I mean, I can't help but be positive about that. I know there's a lot of people who will go, I can't believe that he's saying that. I still can't afford it. Like, I get it. It's now, we don't live in a perfect world. Not everybody, but something's happening right now that is unprecedented in my lifetime. And you're not going to catch me not being positive about that. I'm super excited about that. Now we're going to shift gears now, because this is the most ironic story of the day when it comes to the attack on compound pharmacies. Now, we've been fighting against the big pharma assault on compounding, understanding that the compounding is an important backstop to our entire healthcare system. We rely on it. We need it there. We need a thriving compound pharmacy economy in this country. because we need a backstop that doesn't rely on overseas drugs for life-saving medications. We need infrastructure here for that. I am all about compound pharmacies. Now, we've seen this assault in this era of GLP-1 by Lilly and Novo, of course, trying to defend their intellectual property. But we need to talk about the approach that specifically Novo Nordisk has taken, because every single lawsuit they file, every single grievance they file with the FDA over compounding, and every single public-facing statement they make is designed to make patients on compound pharmacies feel like they're choosing something that is unsafe. And the irony here is that we've covered a long-standing story now since basically I started on the pen. This was prior to Novo Nordisk purchasing the company called Catalent. But Catalent was one of the largest, if not the largest, manufacturer of generic drugs in the world. And they had, by virtue of being the largest, a ton of manufacturing capacity. They did work for Lilly, for Novo, and scores of other pharmaceutical companies. And Novo successfully acquired them at the end of 2024. So this was approved in the US, the purchase at the end of 2024, December of 2024. They've owned Catalent now for a year. And Catalent, this specific site in Bloomington, Indiana, has been cited multiple times for being just filthy, essentially filthy. If you read the FDA reports on this, it's been found to be filthy, and the FDA has allowed them to continue to operate. But this is where the story kind of escalated this week. And it was lost because we had this launch of the Wegovy pill. But this story can't be separated from Novo's long-running campaign against compound safety. And it's so ironic because they issued a recall affecting 4 specific lots of Wegovy pens due to biological particulate matter. There's an outlet in New York basically reporting that particulate was hair. So some referenced hair found inside of pens, some of these articles. Novo's position is these pens were identified during inspection, that they were never released to patients. But here's where patients like us notice the disconnect. For years, they have aggressively warned lawmakers, legislators about patients' risk that they're taking with compounded GLP-1s. There's legislation that we're opposing. It's in our link tree. You can go to otplinks.com and check it out. But there is legislation that currently exists to shut down compounding of GLP-1s at the federal level, and it's popping up at the state level. We just had an interview with Sabina Hemi of GLP Winner the other day, and we talked about just these things. We launched a petition. We're fighting back. They position themselves as the gold standard of manufacturing safety, and there is hair floating around in their Wegovy pens. And yet these manufacturing quality issues continue to persist. And I just find this whole conversation completely ironic, and it undermines the entire argument that Novo continues to make against compounded GLP-1s. So I believe, and this is just my belief, and I'm reporting what I'm reading elsewhere. I don't have firsthand knowledge or anything from the FDA on any of this. But if this is all true, this undermines the entire argument against compounding. Not that it hadn't already with what we did know from the FDA on these Catalent facilities that continue to go on at, business as usual, while they're getting knocks against the FDA for finding things like hair in places that hair shouldn't be in injectable drug manufacturing facilities. So I believe we're seeing a pattern here with these Catalent facilities. I don't know if these specific lot numbers are tied to that facility. If they're not, I think that's even worse to some degree. But patients are spotting these patterns too. And even if they miss the hair in their pens, they're never going to miss the hypocrisy of this story. And it matters. It matters. It doesn't mean that we need to panic and you need to be like holding your Wegovy pens up to the light. There's no evidence of widespread harm, but this is all about credibility. You can't spend years and millions of dollars attacking compound safety and then just sort of dismissing these own massive concerns about your own manufacturing chain. You can't demand trust from the general public while minimizing these repeated quality signals from the FDA. And where there's smoke, there's usually fire. And this is a story that we're going to continue to watch here at On the Pen closely for you. So let's zoom out. This was an interesting podcast to start the year. Arrowhead science is interesting, but the framing deserves scrutiny. Shout out to Jen Kanoush on that one. The Wegovy pill launch expands access in a major way. And maybe ironically, the pill launches at a perfect time when people are like, I don't really want to take those hairy injections. Maybe I'll try the pill. But the launch that Novo had and the accessibility that expands and the price that they did launch it at deserves all the credit in the world, but they don't get a free pass on transparency. They certainly don't get a free pass on consistency and quality in obesity medicine. Not with this many patients paying attention to this and listening to what they have to say. So if this episode here helped you in any way, my ask of you is that you would leave us a 5-star rating and review on the podcast. If you're listening on the YouTube channel, please hit the thumbs up button, because that trains the algorithm that this content is worth spreading out to the masses. And then if you would hit the subscribe button, because the subscribe button is going to be what keeps you in touch with our content long term. The bell for notifications will send an alert to your phone when we go live. We go live now Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 12 p.m. Eastern every day on YouTube. So I hope you'll join us for those live streams where we just have community lives and we chat. Please join us. Thanks again to our sponsor, Shed, for being such wonderful sponsors in this new year. Can't wait for all the things we're going to bring to you. Stay tuned to On the Pen throughout the next few weeks. We've got some exciting stuff for you, so stay tuned to us. Thanks for watching.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.